certainly gateways were opened in 1946. Gateways were opened in 1917, 16, 17, that had brought influence. And whether the government was in conspiracy with that, I mean, I do believe that resulted in abductions and a lot of things that you have out there in sort of ufology. That is probably just too much of it just to say that it's just made up. That doesn't mean everything is true, but we need to discern what is true.
Yeah, I haven't been around for a while, so I have a load of questions.
Okay.
Have you ever considered, Mike, that before, in the time of Noah, they were messing around with DNA and all the rest of it? They're doing the same thing now to a great extent, horrific extent. How did they manage in those days with the lack of knowledge and technical advantage we have today in laboratories and all the rest of it to mutate, to deal with these DNA and RNA, well, not DNA changes, and they were experimenting with mixing and matching different species and whatnot.
Yeah.
How could they do that in the primitive state that they were? Have you ever thought about that?
Well, they weren't primitive. They were different from us, but they weren't primitive. And Watch Your Angels brought that knowledge from another dimension. So they brought the knowledge and they were doing it. Human beings.
Okay, good. I'm glad you brought that up.
The angels would Watch Your Angels who fell. They did it. And then they traded for the knowledge that they then give humans, the knowledge of metallurgy. So that's where they started to make weapons. The knowledge of pharmacology, whether they started to make mood-altering substances. So they gave knowledge in exchange for DNA, and then they used the technology that they had, or the knowledge they had. We tend to think of technology as always being some sort of mechanical or electronics, but of course, technology is just a way of thinking about doing something in a different way.
Okay.
So they had the ability to do things in a different way, like angels can take on physical form or remain in spiritual form. So they have abilities, and we tend to think of it as being primitive, but actually it wasn't. And if you go back and you see the knowledge that they did put into the earth, that knowledge actually affected us quite a lot. And there were quite a number of civilizations that all of a sudden just sprung up, seemingly have advantageous knowledge, which actually came from external circumstances and sources, which then affected. Sumerians were one example, and they had a lot of knowledge of the cosmos. They had a knowledge of science, numerology. They used 6 as their base numerological system. Therefore, we still have today hours, minutes, degrees, angles. All of that came from knowledge which came outside. So they were different rather than primitive. And they had abilities, even in the days when they made the pyramids and megalithic structures, we call them. They had the abilities to align them perfectly to true north, not magnetic north, to true north, and to align them to the gateways in the stars and other things. They had that ability because they were able to manipulate sound and light in a different way than we do today. So how do you think they got, 16 feet by 8 feet pieces of stone to make the pyramids, and enough of those pieces to go around the whole of the outside of France? So the huge amount. How do you think they got them there? And how do you think they were able to cut them and shape them and move them into position? Not by using a whole load of sand and slaves, as people have postulated, but they were able to use the sound like gateway technology they had knowledge of. Now, that knowledge has been removed over time to limit what they were able to do. But some of that knowledge has still remained as sort of esoteric, hidden knowledge, which has been used by certain people who've been able to gather that knowledge from wherever, and use sort of Babylonian, Egyptian knowledge to open gateways today. or in the sort of more modern history. But in ancient history, they used gateways all the time, and they were able to transport things through those gateways around the earth. So it's just different. We tend to think of it as primitive because of certain things that we found. You know, they lived in caves and all of this stuff. Well, we're not talking about the same people.
Okay. So
they are also different. Those mixed species, right. Neanderthals, they're known as, and other things, have some DNA still within the human genome. I think most cultures have at least 2.5% Neanderthal DNA. Well, what was that? We call it Nephilim, we can call it all sorts, but it is manipulated DNA that is still within the human genome today.
So, having gone over that, I agree with you in that respect. Therefore, our normal, if we call normal evolution, has been interfered with by external influences back then. Now we have the same thing happening in the days of Eisenhower, when he reportedly signed a treaty with external beings, giving them access to whatever they wanted to have access to in exchange for something. And today we can speak over these devices because of all these external influences that have been given to us.
Sure. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people who talk about those sort of issues. Some of it is highly conspiratorial. Some of it they have, you know, there's no categoric proof, let's say, to be able to say that. That doesn't mean that certain things haven't happened. Certainly gateways were opened in 1946, gateways were opened in 1917, 16, 17, that had brought influence. And now whether the government was in conspiracy with that, I mean, I do believe that resulted in abductions and a lot of things that you have out there in sort of ufology. That is probably just too much of it just to say that it's just made up. That doesn't mean everything is true, but we need to discern what is true. Now, the key in all of this is the sons of God can overcome and rule in spite of all that man is trying to do and all the external influence that there might have been. We can still, as sons of God, be far above that and administrate the kingdom to ensure that the purpose for that never gets fulfilled. Now, the purpose for God is the kingdom of God fills the earth. In fact, the heavenly kingdom is manifested on earth. The opposite is true, that the enemy wants to have his kingdom on earth. I mean, he wants man worshiping him. And you get Jesus talking about the sons of the kingdom sown into the world and the sons of the enemy sown into the world. Jesus talked about that, and you can say, well, what is that? Well, there may be all sorts of different levels of that, which we think, but the key is we mustn't get frightened or intimidated by things that are going on. Yes, there may be all sorts of technology, transhuman methodologies and agendas to manipulate the human DNA or to pollute the human DNA or do all sorts of things that would keep us from our sonship. But don't just assume everything that you hear or see on the internet is true. We must discern what is and what isn't, and what is mixed and what is shared from a particular agenda, which may not be true. So we've got to be discerning in all of it. And the best way of being discerning is to engage it from the Father's heart. And Jesus, as being the truth, can help us discern what is true and what may be some truth and what be a little truth and what is no truth at all, but is presented as truth. And we've got to be very careful we don't buy into everything. And I sort of do look at quite a lot of this to try and look at, well, what is true? And I find most of it has a grain of truth, but actually is presented in such a way that twists that truth or masks or hides the truth beyond a lot of things. So the enemy still has the same agenda. It's a Luciferian agenda that is the I will agenda. I will be like God. I will ascend. I will be seated in heaven. Effectively, I will have the man worship me. Well, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that methodology has done pretty well in getting people to follow that path of independence, I will, and then outworking that I will agenda through we will or we can and humanism. It only takes a little bit to go to transhumanism. Well, we can enhance our human thing ourselves by nanotechnology or implants or whatever it might be that people are attempting to do to prolong life. Essentially, they're only trying to do what Jesus has already said is ours by inheritance, immortality. So the whole agenda is just a counterfeit of what God has given us in the first place, and Jesus has given us. So we're trying to do what we've already got, and that's the biggest deception that there is. Man trying to be like God when he already is like God as sons of God. But we're doing it in independence with our own methodology, and the method is not right, and the independence is not right. So, yeah.
Like, do these people who have this Luciferian agenda think that their DNA is slightly different from us?
They may do. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there. You know, there's a lot of things. I think the whole Jason Westerfield thing with the Western Gate in 2015, that threw up a whole load of sort of things. There's some of it is just not new. It's been around. Those ideas have been around a long time. Michael Tellinger's ancient alien stuff. Well, see, they see it as positive. They're coming to enhance us. But then you get them also coming in and say, well, they come to enslave us. You know, so there's so much mixture in it, and you've got Jason Westerfield saying the same thing. You know, actually in the same conference, basically indicating these things have come to enslave us, and then also let's invite them to come and enhance us some more. You know, it's not a good thing that we would want to have interference from an external source and to cooperate with it. There may be some DNA that has been manipulated. Obviously, people do have serpent DNA or Cain DNA. They may have Nephilim DNA mixed in. You know, we certainly know that there's Neanderthal DNA within this sort of human genome. So there's probably some mixture. It's when it then becomes, well, I'm from star seed. You know, I was seeded from the stars, you know, and it's like, well, there may be some element of truth to that, but the way in which it's presented makes them an elite. We are the elite because we're sourced from the stars, you know, as if that's so much, that's better than being sourced from God. You know, it's like, well, not really, you know, and I don't believe in aliens from the stars as created beings in our universe. You know, I just don't believe that, but I do believe there are dimensional beings that access through the gateways in the constellations or in the star systems, which may seem like it appears they come from Sirius or Pleiades or any of the other constellations. Then we sort of interpolate into all their sort of aliens from another planet, which God created, you know, rather than beings from another dimension which God created. Now, why am I differentiating that? Because I believe we were given the mandate to expand and fill this universe, not another group of beings. But, you know, there's a lot there which is conjecture because we don't know exactly. What we do know is that there are certain things within DNA which may indicate that there has been some manipulation in the past. You know, but generally, the people who are behind the agenda from an earthly perspective are in it for the power and the position because it offers empire. The Luciferian agenda from the beginning has always been a Babel agenda. We will make a name for ourselves and occupy. And that is the agenda which goes throughout history, which is the empire spirit, which operates politically and often with a religious thing as well thrown in there, to produce civilizations which try and control the world. And you get Daniel having the, giving the interpretation of the statue with the 4 parts, indicating 4 civilizations, or empires, if you like, that would come and go, but the kingdom of God would be established in the time of the last of those, which was the Roman Empire, and the kingdom of God will never go. It will fill the earth. So you have that picture. Well, then there were other civilizations before Babylon, Egyptians and other Sumerians and Assyrians and others that have also had sort of the idea of conquering the world, or as well as Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome, and then a few others afterwards, including the UK, and sort of Germany and Spain and Portugal, and a few others had some ideas of conquest and colonization, or in that way. Now sort of we're coming back to less and less of that as time goes on. Most countries are now independent of other countries, although still connected. And of course, what's going on now in Ukraine is a sort of desire to bring another country back under the control of a sort of, what was the Soviet Union, so it's still there. The agenda is still there. I just believe that that agenda won't succeed, but we want to make sure that we're not promoting it. And I think that's where a lot of Christians are actually promoting an agenda which is clearly Luciferian when I look at it, but they don't think so, because they're promoting it from the religious perspective, because they've bought into a false doctrine, which came through dispensationalism, which essentially has robbed the church of its position, authority, with the sort of rescue opt-out mentality of come and save us, rather than actually fulfilling God's purpose of being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth and ruling it for God, with God. So you have a lot of people who are sort of been deceived by that agenda into thinking that they are supporting a kingdom agenda when they're actually supporting the opposite. So it's complicated and messed up, and history records things which I don't think are all true. So some of it's been masking the agenda that has gone on for the last few hundred years in the latest version of that empire spirit. Once the British Empire started to wane and countries started to have things, then another empire started to take its place. It doesn't appear to be the same type of thing, but it has the same agenda. A millennial rule of Jesus in Jerusalem, with a new temple and a new system, or an old system reintroduced. Now, of course, that's only in Christian Zionist viewpoints. If you look at in Zionist viewpoints, they're looking for a Messiah to rule in Jerusalem and to rule the earth, and of course that is the agenda that's been mixed. And Christians thinking it's all about Jesus, and Jews not totally rejecting Jesus, or the Zionists. I'm not labeling Jewish people in this, because Jewish people are mostly innocent people just following a religion. I would say it's a false religion, the same as every other religion is false, coming out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But it's a failed religion that is sort of still going, no different than other religions that are still going but are not the answer. But others are manipulating that political agenda and the religious agenda for their own ends, and that is what the Luciferian deception is about. Let's trick people into supporting our agenda. And they do that because they have positions of power and authority through the money. They control the finances, therefore they control the media, therefore they control the agenda and keep it hidden from most people. So that's where all the conspiracies come in, where people are sort of finding some truth and then conspiracizing it, if you like, and making it sort of even more obscure, unfortunately, rather than just saying, well, there's been an agenda from the beginning. The agenda is contradictory to God's sonship agenda for the kingdom to fill the earth. It's a different kingdom, or a different governmental system operating in a counterfeit to God. And all this sort of comes through the same narrative. In one way or another, it's all linked. The agenda originally, with Noah and with the Watcher angels, became an agenda to pollute the human race so there'd be no seed. So there would be no Jesus coming to crush the head of the serpent. If they could pollute the seed line. Well, obviously they failed. Did a pretty good job in pretty much getting it down to one person who was pure. And then only one line of that person who was pure after the flood. So they did a very, very good job in polluting the earth. Now, you could say that this agenda today for transhumanism is a similar agenda to, mess up human DNA and people and everything else.
When we consider, Mike, I know you were a fan of Star Trek and all that. We have growing understanding now that what Star Trek and all those movies portrayed, pardon me, was not a science fiction per se, but it was a documentary of reality that we're being introduced to gradually. And in there were a multiplicity of entities, off-world entities, that I'm afraid sometime down the road we're going to have to deal with. We're having a hard time enough of their own differences here on Earth. Introducing new entities is going to be great fun for all of us. How do we deal with that? And who has
everything else? It's not that difficult. You just deal with it in a restoration perspective. Our role is to subdue opposition and bringing in the rule of God's kingdom, not by oppression, but by restoration. So if we're engaging fallen angelic beings or beings from other dimensions who need to be restored, then we help restore them. They're not all fallen, by the way. So there are some that would help us and are helping us. They're not all fallen. Just as only a third of the angelic beings fell. Not all of them fell. Now, I don't know how many of the dimensional realities that are there that fell, and not majority that I've encountered all have looked for help because they've been misdeceived in the past. But it's not a huge problem when sons come into their position of authority. Then you know how to deal with it because you have the heart of God and the authority of God's kingdom to express forgiveness, grace, mercy, love that will transform people. We're not there to fight against them, to destroy them. We're there to restore them. So we've got to get out of the warfare mentality that these are our enemies to these are God's creation that we have been given some responsibility towards to bring about restoration. Then it's an opportunity rather than a negative thing. Hey, just means there are more beings and people that we can actually see restored, because creation it's all about creation, not about just the earth. Now, I do believe the earth is central to it because we're the only sons of God in that sense of actually made in God's image. There are others who are sons of God from the perspective of being created, like the angels were also called sons of God, but they're not made in God's image, and they're not a race that were made to reproduce after the kind of God's image. They were all individually created, the angelic beings, but the other dimensions seem to be races that have been created, but they are not sons of God as we are. And we're still given responsibility to bring about their restoration. And they're looking to the sons to arise and to shine. And our frequency is reaching them, producing hope. Hence, the ones I've engaged in, and I think I've engaged, I don't know, can't remember now, somewhere around 120 odd different dimensional races. They've all wanted help or to support. I've not come across the negative angle to it. Now, the races that I've engaged were under oppression. So not all of them wanted help. Some of them wanted to keep their positions. of overseers or overlords or rulers over people, subjugating them to severe racism and control and manipulation. But others have been asking for help, and we've been helping them. So if they interfere, or if they seek to come and interfere into the human race with sort of incursions, which has happened, then we need then to deal with them again in the right way, not just trying to see, oh, we need to attack these beings. We need to remove their authority and to see them restored. And that's a big difference from coming in the same spirit and being aggressive towards them and everything else. But we're in a position now where the sons of God are legislating and ruling, and we're operating in the earth shield, and we're protecting the earth from this external influence. Whereas previously we weren't in that place. Now we are. So now we're in a much better place to be able to handle anything. Hence 2015, there was no opening of the Western Gate. It was stopped being opening because sons were able to stop it. And now actually the sons of God are now able to open it correctly for its correct influence, and also the north, south, east and west gates within that realm is now being administrated, and the everlasting doors are being administrated to bring about the correct things that should be operating on earth, to bring about the earth being fruitful and increasing and being a sustaining place for immortality. So we're maturing. Therefore, this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate our maturity and function in sonship by functioning in love, ultimately.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
So my question is on this topic as well. Last week on our engagement, we encountered an elemental, which we identified as an elemental. And on pointing it out, someone asked the question, what is an elemental? What is an elemental? Because she hadn't encountered that before. So the quick explanation at the moment in the engagement was that they are sentient beings that are created beings, and they're sort of guardians of certain elements of the earth. Not all bad, not all naughty, let's say, not all, some of them are I guess just neutral, some maybe are fallen, but that there was a little quick explanation, and well, I made a promise to get back. So would you be able to speak into that so I can just point her to your
yeah, I mean, elementals are created beings, and they were created to help Adam rule the universe. And they do represent different aspects of creational reality. So the normal ones we think about are earth, wind, water, fire, but there are other more nature related ones, hence trees, and there's a communication network around the earth and mycelial network where trees connect. And actually I saw a really fascinating article, scientific journal article this last month, about them talking about the earth being sentient because of this mycelial network that is within the soil, therefore producing frequency. I mean, it's quite fascinating. No, it wasn't a Christian article, it was a pure science article, but they were talking about the earth being sentient, which got my attention when I saw the title. I thought, whoa, what's this about? And actually it was really good, because it was exactly what I think we are seeing. Those beings relate to those different elements of creation, and they are there not just on the earth, they're there within the solar system, they're there within the rest of the cosmos as well. They have different functions. Their elementals are also within the different dimensions, because God created it with the same pattern. And the Greek word that people use for that in the Bible, and I don't think we need to have a Bible reference for it necessarily. They use the Greek word stoichion, which talks about the elemental things. It's sort of a little bit of a stretch, I personally feel, but I do believe they exist. I have encountered them, There are thrones. I've seen 7 thrones for ruling with the elementals within the heavens. And they're designed to work and cooperate with us. Well, as we gave up our position of sonship, they then started to cooperate with others who represented, therefore, our position, the angelic being, fallen angelic beings and others. And they also have connected with those who have not rejected the sentience of nature and things, and Wiccans and witches and all that sort of stuff. And some of them are, who would call themselves white and try and do things for good, and some of them are dark and black and do things for bad. So what I've seen is that they are influenced by whoever seems to carry the authority. Therefore, they can be influenced to cooperate with us, or they can be influenced to cooperate with another aspect of that. And they sometimes are involved in what we call natural phenomena, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, anti-cyclone type things, typhoons and things like that, because they join together with perhaps an agenda for disaster, destruction, which is driven by another motive and agenda. So what can we do? They're not fallen per se, they're just influenced.
Right.
Because they were created to be influenced,
It's interesting, Mike, because something was handed off to us from that particular, like a chest was handed off from that particular elemental. So, I took it as we are growing in sons, they are wanting to sort of, in sonship, they're wanting to sort of partner or give us, the part of our what we are meant to rule over, or something like that.
Absolutely. They were created to work in cooperation and in union, oneness with us, for the establishing of God's kingdom and for peace. It's a governmental thing about bringing peace. So their very nature really doesn't like to do anything contradictory to peace, but they were designed to be influenced, and they are influenced by those that carry the greatest authority. So as we do come back into our measure of governmental authority as sons of God, then they were beginning to respond to us. And as we then engage them directly, then they will respond to us even more, which is why it's important to get the message out there that there are created beings that we can directly engage with. When we think about weather miracles, who do we think is responding when we use our authority to change the weather?
I think the common thing might have been angels, like that would, before we came to the understanding of elementals.
But angels aren't. They're not angels. If they were angels, then they would only be doing good, wouldn't they? And so some of the weather systems are destructive. Now, some of it you could say is a natural pattern of things because of the way the earth is and the way the pressure systems work. It's a complex thing, weather. But there are some things very clearly that when we change the weather, we are really directly encountering the elementals of the air to change the wind or the water, to change the moisture levels or whatever it is. So we can speak to them for that purpose. But we've got to be careful that we don't do it indiscriminately or for selfish ends, because then we end up demonstrating to them that we're untrustworthy if we're doing it for selfish purposes rather than for God's kingdom purpose. So we should only be doing what we see the Father doing. There's no evidence that Jesus stopped every storm in Israel for the 30 years that he was around. He did stop some storms by saying, peace be still, when they were contradicting or opposing what his intention was, which was to go across the lake. So you could say that that was a strategy to keep him from going across the lake. And who did he encounter across the lake? Legion. So there was a spiritual dynamic going on there. And we need to be discerning into what dynamics there are, not just assuming that everything is demonic, everything is a fallen angel, everything is this, because it's not always, but sometimes it is. And we've got to work in cooperation and use our authority in the right way to ensure that we're outworking God's purposes. And I would never just assume, to do that. So I don't do an awful lot of weather miracles and things like that. I have done some, and I've done some larger scale ones when it comes to big devastating destruction things. But generally speaking, God doesn't really prompt me in that direction. So, oh no, it's going to rain. Well, great. Soil needs the water. Sometimes it's like we've got to be careful that we don't sort of get over the top on it all. I want to walk down the road when it's dry. Well, okay, but just put an umbrella up, because actually the soil, the earth needs water. We need water, otherwise we don't have enough to drink. There's certain things which we've got to just balance and make sure that we're not operating in a completely self-motivated reason. Oh great, I only have sun over me. Well, I don't think that we should be functioning like that. What we should be looking is to make the earth a fruitful place and make sure the earth is tended, cared for, cultivated, and it's the most fruitful and beautiful place that it was always intended for. We shouldn't be stripping it of its assets, cutting down the rainforests and doing the terrible things that we're doing to it for selfish purposes. So cooperate with the trees. And there was a lot of devastating fires and forest fires, which I think are the tension that's been going on within competing elementals, because they don't always work together.
Yes.
They sometimes work against each other. I remember doing a legislative governmental thing with a group up in Seattle area for things that were going on within Washington state. And I think there was some forest fires and things. And we did a court case and we did some legislation. And the result of that was that it absolutely torrentially rained and put out the fires. So there was a sort of response to our authority in the water, the elementals of water responded to us. Now, it's not just one elemental. There are multiple elementals that operate together with a structure of sort of government that can work together and sometimes can work in opposition. We need to come together to bring it all together in oneness, in union, to bring about God's kingdom purpose, which is to restore everything back to God's original purpose and to bring peace back.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
But scientists are playing with the weather too, and you hear that they're seeding the clouds and doing stuff, and manipulating things as well.
Yeah, they may, some may be. Some are attempting, obviously, to end drought by doing that. So they're sort of trying to seed the clouds to produce water to end droughts and things like that. Again, a lot of people believe in chemtrails and stuff like that, and there's a lot of conspiracy around it. I'm not convinced personally, but I got no sort of hard evidence one way or the other. Not totally convinced by it, but it sort of gets thrown into this general government manipulation, and it all seems to be a bit, oh well, they're all out to do us down. Well, why would they want to harm themselves? So this is what I come down to, most governments do not want to harm themselves. They want to be prosperous. They want to make the best. So why would they want to create droughts? Okay, well, some might do because they will benefit on selling water to the drought areas. They might make a lot of money. Some of it might be financial, possibly, but I don't buy it as a government conspiracy that's out there just to mess everything up. It's like, why would they want to mess everything up? They're messing up their own country. They're messing up their own farmers. Why would they want to do that? So some of it is like, be discerning again and not just buy into every conspiracy that's there There might be a grain of truth, but most of them are not fully true. Yeah, in my experience, anyway. So, yeah. Okay. Anybody else got anything they want to talk about?
If I go back to my original question, Mike, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. At the
Yeah,
coming
that's
of
already
the
taken
Son of
place.
Man. Looks like we're into a repeat of the scenario.
That's already taken place. That was talking about the end of the old covenant. It's not talking about the future. Don't futurize it. Jesus said all these things will happen in this generation. And that's when the days of Noah were seen, because there was the end of the old, destruction of the old. You know, that was what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about the future. So we're not living in the days of Noah. We're living in the days
he says, as it was in the days of Noah.
Yeah, but he was talking directly to, in Matthew 24, to the end of the old covenant, not the future.
But he interjected there that at his coming, he said, at his coming.
Yeah, and he's come.
Before his coming, that would happen.
Yeah, he did, and he came, because his coming was in that generation, as he said it would be. You say you're sort of buying into a futurist version of the Bible, which puts it all off to our day, when it was actually in the generation that Jesus said it would happen. All these things will happen in this generation, not a future generation, that generation. And they did. So he did come in that generation to bring about the end of the old covenant and the establishing fully of the new. That was his purpose. So it was never about the end of the world. The world in Matthew 24 was translated wrongly in James. It was age. It was the end of the age, not the end of the world. Totally different word. Therefore, that's already happened. So that doesn't mean that things don't repeat themselves. It doesn't mean that there isn't an agenda to manipulate DNA to pollute human race. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't. It's just not a biblical thing. It's, well, we're in the days of Noah. Well, we're not. You know, we're in the days when the kingdom of God's filling the earth and the restoration of all things is taking place. That is, you see, if we buy into a future disaster, we can't believe in restoration or be participating in it. You know, if the earth is all going to be destroyed by fire, what's the point of looking after it? See, all of that teaching is so removed Christians from the forefront of our position to be bringing the kingdom of God into the earth and to establishing God's kingdom in the earth. You know, that's the whole purpose of it. And the agenda is to remove our authority, so we don't. And if we believe it's all going to end up in disaster and being rescued, then we opt out rather than ruling and establishing the kingdom. So, you know, the whole futurizing of the Bible and eschatology. I mean, eschatology is actually an oxymoron, because you can have no end days, the end times, because there's no end. There's no end to the increase of his government and peace. You can't have the end. So it really, it applied to the end. It's a past thing. When Jesus was talking about the end, he was talking about the end of the old covenant in that generation, which happened finally in AD 66 to AD 70. And actually, Jesus came. And there's historical records from Jewish historians, Roman historians, Christian historians, Greek historians, who actually record him coming, being seen over Jerusalem in the clouds with angels, you know, being seen in different, I mean, this is historical record, which most people have got no idea, because they're thinking it's looking for the future rather than looking to the past. The early church knew all about it. They recorded it. Eusebius recorded it. Josephus recorded it. Tacitus recorded it. They all record that period where things were seen in the sky over Jerusalem during that siege by the Romans that brought about the end of the old covenant and the beginning of the new. I will go into that in great detail in the book, next book when it comes out, and give you the references that you can look at and look it up. look up Josephus and those guys, you know, and they recorded it. But the dispensationalism and then premillennialism and the rapture has presented it as this is going to happen in our future. Well, it was their future, of course, because Jesus was talking about what's going to happen in their generation. But our future is not going to happen because it's already happened. And how many books have been written in the 70s and 80s and 90s telling you when it was going to happen? And it's still being prophesied. Jesus is going to be coming. The rapture is going to happen. Is, you know, the millennium is going to happen. It's all going to happen. You know, every time there's some, like even now, you get the, you know, prophets of doom prophesying that even now what's going on Ukraine is all about Russia bringing Armageddon. You know, it's absolute nonsense, but they buy into that because it wasn't Saddam Hussein. It wasn't the previous versions of who these people are who are going to do this and do that and do the other. You know, all of the things failed. You know, every prediction about the coming second coming, so-called, or the rapture has failed. You know, Hal Lindsey, all his predictions about the 80s, 1984, then it was, you know, later and later and later, then it was the year 2000, and it all failed, never happened. I think the latest one that I really saw, I think, was September the 24th, 2020, I think, when it was supposed to be coming again. He didn't, but people bought into it. They got so fearful that he was going to come and they weren't going to be prepared. And you know, terrible things happen. You know, one lady killed her 2 children because she didn't want them to go through the tribulation. I mean, how sad that they could use a false doctrine to give them the excuse to actually kill their own children out of fear. You know, so we don't have to be concerned that we're in the days of Noah. The days of Noah were in Noah's day, and as in the days of Noah at the end of the old covenant, when there was a rescue mission, because all the Christians escaped, and all those who didn't get into the ark, figuratively, leaving Jerusalem, died in Jerusalem, or most of them, or went into exile. You know, several 100,000 were crucified and thrown into Gehenna, the fiery rubbish dump outside of Jerusalem, which is a fulfillment of Jesus saying these things will happen. Again, nothing to do with hell and some future eternal judgment. Actually, what was going to happen at the old covenant coming to its end.
So Mike, really, our eyes should be totally fixed just on, like the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come.
Yeah.
And our restoration and transformation so that we can come as sons in the complete harmony with him. And then your will be done to bring about restoration and transformation, not only on earth, but the entire cosmos. And as more and more of us come into it, it's just going to have that effect of just greater government on earth and throughout the entire cosmos.
Yeah,
Great.
Totally. Yeah, that's, and if there are things that contradict that, then we bring God's kingdom into that situation by ruling as sons and administrating love and grace and mercy. You know, so, you know, world situations, we shouldn't just be passive and sit around thinking, oh, well, it's all right. You know, we'll be restored one day and the kingdom of God's filling the earth. We're responsible for administrating God's kingdom to fill the earth. So there are situations that we do need to administrate and legislate into to ensure that the government of God and peace is established. And when there isn't peace, we should be looking to bring peace and to administrate peace. So, you know, I'm legislating a lot into the whole Ukraine situation to bring about peace. I'm legislating, not passively. I'm not legislating for war into coming a war. We're going to deal with Putin forever or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Forgiving Putin. You know, I've seen people who are legislating into his life who are calling for his fragmented, broken soul to be restored by bringing him in their hearts and doing things very positively towards the guy who's doing some horrendous things, you know, but we need to love those who seem to be portraying themselves as our enemies and pray for them, not agree with them or excuse what they're doing, or the other fanboys of Putin, the Elijah list, who are basically saying that he's doing God's work in Ukraine as God's man in Ukraine. I mean, absolute nonsense, complete rubbish. But the same doom and gloom prophets who are prophesying Trump was God's man are now prophesying Putin is God's man. You know, same guys. I mean, literally prophesying that he is dealing with the hidden state and the traffickers in Ukraine by destroying Ukraine. I mean, and he's doing it for God. I mean, how can you possibly believe that a God of peace is doing that? He's not. You know, and they go, oh, well, he did it in the Old Testament. No, it's recorded in the Old Testament that he might have done, but he didn't, because he's never going to bring about war. And he's always going to bring good out of everything that we do in the way we're doing it. So I'm definitely legislating that bombs will fail to go off. Different things will, you know, things will happen. People will be supernaturally protected. Angels, legions of angels will be administrating in that area. Now, there's only so much that you can do because people are choosing to do it. But I believe there will be stories of miraculous interventions that come out of this, like in the past, you know, where these things have amazing stories of things that have happened, that when people start legislating for peace in the midst of the war that there's going on, which is horrendous for those people who are having to face that. But I've been so impressed by their attitude. You know, I listen to quite a lot of the news on the radio when I'm in my workshop and in the car and things, and so impressed by their attitude of wanting peace and and so dignified in so many of their approaches. Just when I, you know, hear them talking about what they're going through and things are happening, and there's just this amazing sense. And also it's like the world has come together pretty much in agreement that we want peace, not war, you know, and there's this desire for peace to take place. And I think there's an awakening that people are happening. And I've never seen in my lifetime the world come together in such a coherent way to say we're not having this anymore, but not in a warmongering way either, generally. You know, much more in a sense of let's bring about peace. Okay, the political people will do the political things. You know, they'll do sanctions and they'll do other things because that's their way of doing it. That's their methodology. So they're trying to do that. We've got a different methodology. You know, if we want an end to the war in Ukraine, well, how are we going to bring about that end? What are we going to do? You know, I legislate for desertions from the Russian conscripts and troops. It's like that they'll see the light, that I legislate for the truth to be exposed in Russia. You know, despite all the social media blockouts and all of this stuff, you know, we don't have to be idle. We can definitely look to do things which are in line with God's heart to bring about peace. I'm not legislating for the destruction of Putin and other things like that, which is the opposite spirit. I want to see things. Now, obviously, if Putin had an encounter with an angel of light and an own Damascus Road encounter that revealed Jesus to him, that would be the best way of solution in this, because he would totally be transformed. But if he's resistant to that, like Paul was resistant to it until it happened, then there may be other ways that we can bring about peace and legislate for peace. But we should be doing it as sons of God, because that is our kingdom mandate. No end to the increase of his government and peace. You know, and if the good that God will bring out of this brings about peace or awakens people to the horrors of war and the things of, you know, the empire spirit and control and the political spirit and all of that stuff going on, then that will only be a positive in the end. Although certainly what's happening right now is pretty horrendous, you know, and, you know, it is pretty much war crimes, you know, bombing civilians and hospitals. And I mean, it's just like it's never been sort of done, you know. But then in the Second World War, what did we do? You know, bombed Dresden, absolutely destroyed it. You know, it's happened in the past. You know, we also have done things like that. You know, we dropped 2 nuclear weapons in Japan to destroy a whole 2 cities to stop war. But, you know, it's not the best way of doing it. You might say it had its result, but you know, certainly it's not really the way God would want to bring about peace, you know, to drop nuclear weapons or bomb civilians into obliteration. You know, well, of course, you know, that's what Hitler did as well, by dropping V2 rockets on London and, you know, bombing the countries, flattening certain cities, you know, with indiscriminately, without care for human life or for civilians. You know, so, you know, it's happened before. We want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. You know, so let's awaken to peace and see the world awaken to peace. You know, and let's see people rise up in Russia and say no. You know, thousands are leaving into Finland and other places from Russia because they just want to get out. Yeah, so it is a difficult situation, in which I believe we should, as sons of God, be looking to bring about peace and legislate for peace.
You know, the difficult part always becomes, while you're legislating for peace and that, is some of the, taking Ukraine as an example, do they turn around? Do they stand their ground? Do they want weapons from the European Union to stand their ground? Or do they roll over and give over to have peace? Because you can have peace, he can have peace tomorrow if he wanted.
Well, no, he could have occupation.
Occupation, what would be peace? Or wouldn't be the killing?
Well, yeah, but they'd just be
killing.
killing.
I don't know. I'm asking you.
Yeah, it would be killing another way, wouldn't it? I mean, you know, I'm not saying we should just roll over, but whatever we do, we need to be doing it with the right heart, the right motive and attitude. And that is a desire for peace, not war or retribution or revenge or anything else. And, you know, resisting with the right heart is not necessarily the same as war. It's the heart which is the issue. I mean, Jesus sort of said to those, you know, if someone slaps you around the face, you know, we'll turn around and give them the other cheek to hit. Well, he wasn't saying we should go around offering our cheek for people to hit. He was saying make better to do that than have a toxic heart of revenge and unforgiveness. So I'm not suggesting we should just roll over, but we've got to be careful we don't escalate the thing into we want our revenge and we want war and we want to go in and do this. So I'm not a politician, and my kingdom governmental role is not to operate in politics. For those who are politicians, that is their job, I guess, and they are trying to, using methods which will support Ukraine without escalating it into full-blown war for the rest of the world in Europe. Now, you know, I wouldn't want to see a war that way. I don't believe we're going to see a nuclear war, because I think there's legislation within the realms of heaven that limits some of what can and can't take place to a degree. But I do believe that we should be looking for peace. But peace, what does peace mean? And I think that's we've got to be careful that we don't just read the English word and think of peace and then look at, well, an absence of war. You know, if Russia occupied Ukraine, it would not be peace, because there would be civil disobedience. Those oppressed people forced under a regime would not think they were at peace just because they weren't any more bombing. So we've got to be careful how we define peace. And a lot of it is about the motive of what you do and why you're doing it, not just what you do. You know, so what Jesus was saying was, if you cannot come with the right attitude and the right motive to say no to something, then better say yes to do it than have a toxic, polluted heart. That's what he was saying when he said basically turn the other cheek. He wasn't suggesting we have to go and just let anyone hit us, but better let someone hit you than if you react and kill them back. You know, better let them hit you than you create toxicity in your own heart because you're unforgiving, resentful, and bitter towards someone. Same with the, you know, walking the extra mile, giving them your cloak if they steal your jacket or whatever. He wasn't saying that you should go and do that. He was saying better do that than have a toxic, unforgiving heart, because that will pollute your soul way more in what you're doing. So you can say no. You can say no. If someone wanted to come into my house to kill my family, I would be saying no, you can't do it. But how would I be saying no? Using the authority I have as Son of God to legislate no. I wouldn't be shooting them or killing them because we have a higher measure of authority. And you get lots of testimonies of people being able to stop bullets and stop people firing bullets by knowing who they are and using that identity and authority to say no. But you've got to do it with the right heart. And therefore, I wouldn't be angry with the person who wanted to do that in a way of, I want revenge against them, so I'm going to kill them before they kill me. I mean, I've obviously talked a little bit about this. Some people just don't get it, particularly our US friends. They don't always get it because they have a sort of ingrained view of what defense and attack is and all of that. And one guy said, well, yeah, I'd shoot first and ask God's forgiveness later. Yeah, that was what his response was. And it's like, okay, so you would need to ask forgiveness. So you know it's wrong, and yet you'd still do it because you think you have a right to do it. But you still know it's wrong. And the guy was obviously totally conflicted because I think cognitive dissonance was going on, even to say what he did as a challenge, I think, when it comes to, okay, well, I'll shoot first and ask forgiveness later. Well, there's a better way. You don't need the weapons of war. Our weapons are not weapons of war. We have stronger weapons when we know how to use them. And if I could focus a frequency of love towards someone who was looking to do me harm, and therefore suspend what they were doing with the authority I have to say no in love, then that's another measure of authority, a higher measure of authority than using a gun. So we've got to be careful we don't buy into a political system of it, whether it be your Second Amendment or whatever right you think you've got to shoot somebody. That doesn't override Jesus saying, pray for your enemies and forgive them. That is a higher law. You might have a law of your nation that says you can do this to defend yourself. In self-defense, you can kill somebody. But actually, God's law is higher than that. And that doesn't give us the excuse to kill somebody. In fact, Jesus said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. I say unto you, totally contradicting what they thought they had a right to do. Now, most of our governmental systems and laws are based on the Old Testament and Old Covenant, not the New. So we think that's a godly thing when actually Jesus has already countermanded it in the New Covenant. So it isn't. So we've got to look at what is the New Covenant way. Now, I know people say, well, you're very idealistic. Well, we should be. With the sons of God, we've got to see it from a heavenly perspective and not an earthly one. Otherwise, we're just going to operate like everybody else does. We'll buy a gun to defend ourselves. Well, we have a higher measure of authority when we start operating in sonship and legislating for things and using that authority. Yeah, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't use our authority, but use it with the right heart and right motive to bring about the changes we want to see take place. But obviously, a lot of people aren't there yet. Hence, we get a lot of conflicted people knowing what's right in their heart, but in their heads, sort of like being conflicted. Well, yeah, but this is what we got to do. You know, I'll have to shoot someone if they were going to come and do this. You know, so even though they knew it was wrong. You know, I think that's the conflictedness that people are in when God starts to reveal the truth, which contradicts what their present belief systems are. And I do believe that awakening to love is taking place, which is going to create a huge amount of cognitive dissonance in people, where what they believe just doesn't add up with what God is revealing.
Like when you legislate you're legislating for a solution that the net effect is, let's say, political. Take, for instance, in Ukraine, what is happening? What happens if part of that is a Luciferian agenda? And unwittingly, I'm actually, instead of knowing what the real truth is, I'm legislating for that. What is safe to legislate? Just to legislate for peace. That's the safest thing.
Peace, and I mean, everything we should be doing is operating in love, because God is love. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love it operates in forgiveness. We must make sure whatever we do, we forgive first. If I'm going to look at dealing with what's going on, in a sense, let's say with someone like Putin, I can't be going at him in unforgiveness, wanting his removal, wanting someone to go and assassinate him, wanting someone to go and kill him. I've got to look at, why is he behaving the way he is? I'm going to choose to forgive and release him for what he's doing. I'm going to pray blessing on him. Well, what's blessing? Not what he thinks is blessing, that he'd win in Ukraine, or whatever other version of him thinking he's being blessed. What's blessing? That he would be encountered by God, that he would be healed of his brokenness and fragmentedness, and obviously his damaged soul. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing such things as he's doing. And if he is being manipulated by another agenda behind that, that would be exposed, but I'm going to always want to operate from love and peace in doing that, and keep checking my heart that I'm genuine in what I'm wanting to take place. And I'm always going to be checking the Father's heart. What does he want me to do? So I'm only going to do what I see the Father doing. Even in something like this, I'm not going to make assumptions of what I should be doing. I want to make sure of cooperating with what the Father's doing. And of course, there may well be a bigger picture that God will bring good out of this that I can't see. But I know God's desire is always going to be for peace, because Jesus is the Prince of Peace. Jesus came into the world and they heralded peace and goodwill to all men. That was his intention. Now, I know figuratively he was talking about coming and bringing, a sword and whatever, but he wasn't talking about killing people. He was talking about dividing things, showing what's right and what's wrong. We've got to be so careful we don't read into some of the things that Jesus said and make them out to be an excuse for war. Very clearly, when Peter cut off the high priest's servant's ear, he told Peter to put his sword away, and he healed the person's ear. So there was something about what Jesus was doing, which was a demonstration of what peace is. But of course, Jesus didn't resist when they came to take him away, because he had a higher purpose and he knew what was going to happen to him. So he didn't resist it. But that doesn't mean that we can't resist when someone is trying to do something to us which is harmful and contradictory to God's purpose for us. But how we resist it must be done in the right way. Otherwise we negatively affect ourselves if we do it in the wrong way. And the more we're filled with love and experience unconditional love by God, the more we're able to release unconditional love to others. And unconditional love means we have to, in a sense, demonstrate that love towards those who appear to be undeserving of it from the way they're doing things. That's what unconditional means, no conditions. So God loves Putin as much as he loves me, you, and everybody else, because he's a child of God. Does God like what he's doing? Absolutely not. Because it's totally contradictory to his real identity as a child of God. Because that would be someone who operated in love, joy, and peace. Not operating in any of the negative aspects, who would be demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit, not the opposite. But it's obviously a huge challenge when you see things which appear that the world is in this terrible position. But I think we've just got to look at the bigger picture and not just look at the immediate temporal things that are happening right now, because this is what's taking all the news right now. and then something else will come along, and something else will come along. This has taken the eyes off other things that were going on before. Now everything's about this, you know. That's what tends to happen. Cycles of things happen that just change the focus of what people are looking at. You know, I mean, there was all sorts of things on the news, you know, when the Syria was going on and all the things that were happening in Syria. I've not heard anything about what's happening in Syria for, I don't know, 2 years probably in the main sort of news. It's still going on though. So if news cycles move, we've got to start looking with an eye that sees the way God sees it and focuses on that, you know. And if we're not operating in love, then we're going to operate in something which is contradictory to God. And we've got to be so careful that we do that. Yeah, don't do it, you know, and let's make sure that our motive of our heart is pure and motivated by love.